Welcome to In the Seams, a podcast by Broken and Mended with your host, David Heflin.
Okay, I want to welcome you back to In the Seams, and this will be our last podcast that we record for this year. So I want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and all that. In the Seams will be back in the new year, and hopefully we'll be a little bit more consistent in recording. But I'm just kind of proud that we've been able to do this here twice in the last month, and that would be a good goal, I think, for us going forward. I want to let you know what we're going to be talking about today. I have Bethany Honaker on our podcast, and she is already associated with Broken and Mended. In fact, you can find her on our website. There's a short bio there about her and her work with Broken and Mended. Bethany spent part of her childhood in Kenya, and so became a natural person, at least for me, to ask to come in and help me with the work we're doing there. And Bethany was willing to do that. And so, Bethany, I want to just welcome you to In the Seams, and just glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to be talking with Bethany about her own story and some of the things that have been costly to her, particularly how her dreams and her life have changed because of chronic illness. And this is part of a bigger project. So the podcast in itself is valuable, but it's also part of something else I'm working on, which I'm not ready to go public with it at this particular point, but these conversations are part of, I'll tell you this much, acknowledging what we have lost to chronic illness, to be very real and honest about that, because I think sometimes, or maybe all the time, that's the only way that we can move forward in our life. We still have a life to live, and we still have purpose in that life, but a lot of times we can't get to that if we're still hung up on not acknowledging what has taken place in our stories. Bethany, before we get into that, I do want to ask a little bit, just because you're actually closer to the situation than I am. How is the work in Kenya going with Broken and Mended and the support groups there? Kind of a ballpark of how many groups we have, and just kind of give us a little update on your work in that regard.
Yeah, so the work in Kenya is very exciting, growing, I would say, exponentially. The Kenyan culture very openly welcomes the idea of support and encouragement and literacy and togetherness. And so I think the resources that Broken and Mended is providing to the different churches has really made a difference for them in encouraging their members. When I first started, we had maybe about 30 or 40 groups on the ground. Currently, we are closer to probably 100 groups, with many on the wait list waiting for resources. And they are texting me almost every day, asking me if I have an update, asking me what else they can do, and sharing pictures of the work, which is just very exciting.
Yeah, they're good about sending pictures, and I know that they're excited about what they're getting to do there. And I think it's only going to grow more as we're working on a Swahili translation that may be available as early as January. And so that's going to be another tool that we can put in their hands, and Lord willing, and this is all in process. We may be going to Kenya this later this summer, or next summer, I guess I should say, since we're not turned to the new year yet, but and be able to get to meet some of these people in person. And I just would think that would only continue to enhance the work, not only numerically the growth, but the quality of the relationship and the depth of meeting people in their suffering. And so, yeah, thank you, Bethany, for your willingness to serve in that capacity. It has been an amazing blessing, I know, to me and to Broken and Mended as a whole. I do want to get into your story a little bit, because that's why we're here. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit just about what your life was like before chronic illness and what your aspirations were, and maybe bring us up to the point in which that chronic illness entered into your life.
Yeah, so I've had symptoms since I was a child, but when you're a child, you don't know that what you're experiencing isn't normal, and so you don't think much about it, right? You just continue to go about your day and enjoy being a child. I was raised as a missionary kid, raised overseas, and as I entered into high school and college, my kind of dream for my life was that I was going to go back overseas and was going to do missionary work. And so I went to a Christian college. I got a nursing degree. I married a preacher from the college. And we kind of started down that pathway of, what can we do to prepare ourselves for going overseas and ministering to people. Um, During that time, during those first couple of years, as we were preparing, I had my first child, and in during the pregnancy, I actually had to quit work because that's when I really started to have a lot of my own symptoms that were more debilitating, more fatigue, more pain, that sort of thing. And my first child was born with a congenital defect, which kind of that then stopped us to start re-looking at everything in our life to say, all right, what pathway does the Lord want us to go forward? And at that time, there was a lot anticipated for her, a lot of future treatments and surgeries and things like that, that really kind of made it to where we felt like we needed to stay in a country that could provide that for her. We felt that our first priority was to our family that God has given us. And so we kind of reshifted in that capacity, and my husband went back to school to get another license in computer support so that he could get another job to help support our family. And I continued to work in nursing, but funny enough, over the years that I worked as a nurse, as symptoms progressed, I had to keep shifting. So I started off working in a med surge floor, and that's when I started having just debilitating low back pain, and I couldn't lift patients anymore. And so I shifted to working in an ICU, had my second pregnancy, and during that, again, symptoms progressed because hormones are a big kind of trigger for Ehlers-Danlos. And I couldn't work bedside anymore at that point. And so I shifted again after she was born to working in a physician's office, and that suited really well. But then we had to move just for a lot of different reasons to another state to be with family. And at that time, I shifted into a role as a nurse educator, and eventually as a transplant coordinator. So, kind of multiple shifts throughout the first several years of our marriage and the early years of our kids' life. Um, I'd say, of the last 12 years, 10 of those years, I continued to work as a transplant coordinator, caring for kidney patients after they'd gotten a kidney transplant. And during those 10 years is when I really felt like I had found kind of the place where I could minister to other people, just developing those long-term relationships, getting involved in their lives, making a difference, helping improve their quality of life. But it's something that I could continue to do despite all of the joint issues and the pain and the fatigue and the other symptoms. When COVID hit, of course, everything got harder. And I again got to the point with my health where I wasn't sure I could continue anymore. Because one of the responsibilities of a transplant coordinator is to be on call. And to be on call, I could be up, all weekend long and then expected to be back in the office. And I couldn't do it anymore. It was just too much. That was probably the hardest transition for me because I felt like I had finally found the place where the Lord wanted me and the place where I could serve, in addition to being able to care for my family, but I couldn't do it anymore. And the symptoms and the health issues, I felt like had taken that away from me, but also made it to where I couldn't support my family in the way I wanted to either financially. So it was a very hard transition. I actually worked with a Christian trauma therapist. She happened to be a pastor's wife and happened to be married to a spouse who had a muscular disorder. And so it's just the perfect fit for me during that time to help me kind of come to terms with that. Because one of the things as you go through that you have to deal with is the guilt of feeling like a failure, that I've let my family down, I've let my patients down, so many people in my life who need me that I can't care for in the way that I wanted to. And so she helped me come to realize that it's important to care for yourself because self-care is caring for other people. Self-care, keeping yourself strong and yourself healthy, allows you to continue to minister to others. And so during that kind of year that I worked with her, I transitioned and took a job. I now work for a large medical insurance company, and I do nursing case management. I take care of transplant patients. But now I'm on the authorization side of things and more the education side of things. Um, and because of my role, I also do a lot of authorizations for non transplant related services. And ironically enough, I am the pain management expert on my team. Anytime they get requests for injections and the clinicals aren't clear, they'll say, "Hey, Bethany, will you look at this? Because I'm not sure if this is appropriate or not, but you know the lingo." And I do, because I've pretty much had every of these injections done to myself. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. And I though I feel like a lot has been taken away, I also feel like the Lord has been there kind of gently guiding and leading to where he wanted me to be in each place and time.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I jotted down a couple things I wanted to kind of circle back to, if I could, in your story. And first, I just want to get the disease that you have, Ehlers-Danlos. How do you say that?
So I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome.
Danlos.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep, it's a genetic condition. It's a connective tissue disorder. Basically, when you're born with your system being a little bit laxer than it should be. And that means your joints can be hypermobile, and you can have problems with other systems in the body too, skin and gut and heart and all of those things as
Very
well.
systemic.
So, yes. And again, like, I can look back and see that I had symptoms as a child, but didn't really know that I wasn't normal until one day one of the kidney doctors I worked with says, "Hey, Bethany, that's not normal. You need to get that checked out." And after a very long diagnostic odyssey, I was able to get that formal diagnosis.
Well, and that kind of diagnostic odyssey that you talk about, I know is something a lot of people can relate to, and also it can be relieving, even if what you find out you have is going to be a lifelong, illness and struggle. I know it can be relieving just to get a diagnosis. I think it can be affirming that, okay, I'm not crazy, and I really do have a very real issue going on. Not if, and if you don't get a diagnosis, that's you're also not crazy, but people may see you that way, or that you may feel that way at times because you just want to get at least be able to name it. That was helpful to me. I didn't have a very long journey to diagnosis in my particular situation, but I have heard a lot of people that have, and I know that's part of the struggle too. Another thing I think people can relate to from your story, and I did at certain points as well, is kind of this path you think, well, this is where God wants me to go. And you start off down that path and you find fulfillment in that path, and then find out, at least to continue, it becomes a dead end. And that can be very faith destabilizing in a way, I think, because you've I don't know, I'll let you say it for yourself. Did you feel that God had misled you, or that you had just read the sign wrong, or how did you feel in the moment when you were dealing with that? Yeah, this is the part where I think God wants me to go, and then that ended up not being the case, at least long term.
Yeah, I can think of multiple times in my life where that has happened. I think initially you feel very afraid. You feel depressed, you feel lost, you feel confused, just so many different emotions to kind of be like, wait a second, I thought this is what you wanted me to do, Lord. Like, why is all of this changing? Like, did I do something wrong? Did I misunderstand you? Did I not do the right thing? Like, have I let you down? I think, again, when you're dealing with chronic illness, there's that constant feeling of it being your fault, that it's your body or your disease, that you're the one at fault, that your family or the people around you can't do what they want to do or do what they need to do because you're holding them back or you're limiting them. And I think sometimes even letting God down, like, I'm sorry, Lord, I wasn't strong enough to do what you wanted me to do, or I didn't. I didn't do the right things or take the right medicine or whatever. Just that a lot of guilt, a lot of grief, a lot of confusion. It's hard. And definitely why I mentioned that I worked with a chronic disease therapist, because it those moments are tough and you really need support to help you work through all the different kind of feelings and thoughts to get to kind of a better place.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to the therapy part of your story and just, because I think that's an important point. I don't want to miss that. But I do want to say, I think people maybe that don't have chronic illness or chronic condition don't realize the amount of decisions that you have to make as a patient, and that causes sometimes you to have a lot of self-doubt, and so the doctor you choose, the approach you choose with that doctor, the medicines you choose, and it always leaves this kind of second guessing. Should we have done this? Or sometimes I think, was I too eager to just do what the doctor said, and should I have considered other choices? And so, if people are listening to this that haven't been through this, they may be wondering, well, how could you think anything's your fault? And ultimately, we know it's not, right? I mean, logically, but I think emotionally, we feel that the baggage really of every decision that has to be made, and always kind of the second guessing that's going on, and that is a lot. And so I did want to bring up the counseling again, because I wonder, I don't have any stats on this, so I don't know how many people dealing with chronic conditions have also been to counseling or seen a therapist. I have, a few times in my life. I've had kind of two different seasons where I was going regularly to a therapist, and for me, it was just dealing with the depression, and the way that just takes your zest for life away when you're going through it. And so, what would you say to someone that was struggling with that decision of whether they should go to see a therapist or see a counselor?
Well, first off, I'd say that it's not your fault. I think that there are some Christian circles that feel like if you just prayed more and had more faith, you wouldn't need that, or you wouldn't feel like that, and that's just not the case. There's biological reasons when we struggle with anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. So that's what I would first say is don't let others tell you there's something wrong with you or you're not a good Christian because you need that. Second would be to reach out and to keep reaching out. Like when I first started going to therapy, I used a company online, and it was a couple of therapists before I found one that I meshed with. The first couple of people just weren't a good fit until I happened to find this lady who I believe was a godsend for me. So don't hesitate to keep asking and to keep looking, because you deserve to have someone in your life, someone who listens, someone who believes, and someone who can help you kind of work through all of the different challenges that you're dealing with.
Yeah. You know, I know that for my own experience and my own evaluation of myself, I thought, and this is going to sound kind of arrogant. Maybe I was, that I was so good, so analytical that I could process everything myself. I wasn't with a counselor probably more than 5 minutes before I realized how important that outside voice was, especially a trained, a professional that could give me insight into things that I had not even thought about, and connections that I had not even made. And so, I really needed it so much more than I realized. And it helped me, like you said, it just helped me to work through some of just the trauma, the struggle of that chronic illness and chronic pain brings. I mean, it reshapes what our life looks like, and it takes away so much of our self-determination, and maybe that's an illusion anyway, but while we're living in that illusion, we feel like we can determine, even if we're trying to be responsive to God's calling in our life, we still feel like we have a role in choosing that and following that path. And so to be put into a position where we have this loss of control, or maybe the loss of the illusion of control, either way, I think is something that you're going to need some help working through. And I really do want to encourage more people to seek out that kind of help. And I know that it can be a struggle financially. Depends on what your insurance will cover and all that. And so I recognize that there may be some obstacles, but I think it's worth overcoming those obstacles. Other than just to give in to um, really a situation where you can't get help or won't get help. And so that's something. Tim Gunnell's another guy that's on our board, and we specifically talked last time about men and chronic illness and chronic pain, because men are even more reluctant to go and talk to a counselor, or even sometimes go to the doctor. Chronic illness is going to make you go to the doctor eventually, but really trying to encourage people to reach out and get help. And so if you're a man listening to this episode, I would encourage you to go back, listen to that previous episode as well. I think Tim and I had a really great conversation about what is a kind of a particular problem in chronic illness circles, and that is men trying to just do everything on their own and not admit to any weakness. But that can be a problem for women too, and women can also feel like they got to solve it themselves. Did it take you a while to get to that point where you were willing to seek out that kind of help?
I definitely had to get to a very low point before I was willing to accept that. I think being a nurse and being a Christian, you feel like you should have all I feel like I should have all the tools to deal with it, that I should be able to manage it on my own. But I just got to that place where I don't know, the way that I describe it is I felt like the weight of the world was on me and needed me, and I had nothing left to give. I was empty. I was completely out of any resources whatsoever for anyone. And that's when I realized, all right, something has to change because I can't, like, there's nothing left of me anymore.
Yeah. You touched on that in your kind of opening story, when you mentioned self care and how that becomes so critical to us being able to help anyone else. We feel guilty because if we think, oh, we got to go take care of ourselves, that somehow we're doing something selfish. But we learn, and I think counselors do help us to see this, but other people in our life can too, that taking care of yourself is essential if you're going to be able to help anyone else. And that is especially true if you're being drained by chronic illness and pain, and all that comes with that. And so how has emphasizing self-care put you in a better position to be able to help others going forward, or to be there for others going forward in kind of a new way than you used to be able to?
Well, something my counselor said that was the turning point for me is that she talked about Jesus and how Jesus constantly had people who needed to be cared for, people who are hungry, who are sick, who needed to be poured into. And even Jesus had to take time away. He had to go to the mountaintop and be alone and pray and take care of himself in order to continue caring for others. And that was what really spoke to me and helped me realize, okay, this is what Jesus wants me to do, and this is what I need to change. And that's what I think kind of was the starting point for the recent job change for me. Working as a transplant coordinator, I gave everything to care for those patients. They were very sick. They needed a lot of attention. I could put in 50, 60, 70 hours a week in trying to keep them alive and healthy. And I loved it, but I did nothing but give and never looked to my own needs. I just would kind of, well, let's slap a TENS unit on, a lidocaine patch, put the brace on, and keep going, right? I just would throw more things at the symptoms and keep pushing through them until I kind of got to that breaking point. And um, now what I'm doing at working for a health insurance company, it allows me to work from home. I only have 40 hours a week. I'm not on call. And because I'm at home, I'm able to pace better. I'm able to care for myself better, not having to go into the office. I don't have to put makeup on if I don't want to, and that saves some time and energy in my day. That's just a little example. But um, you can ask my husband. I'm a different person than I was before. I have more energy and time to give to my kids versus coming home completely wiped out. Um, and we're able to do more together as a family. So in the moment, it felt like chronic disease took away something that I loved. But now looking back, I can see the Lord's hand in, no, wait, caring for yourself is what's most important right now. That's going to let you keep caring for others and let you enjoy better quality of life. And that's what I want for you. I want an abundant life for you.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. God does not expect us to give anything that He doesn't provide to us, And there's an old hymn it reminded me of, if that has the line. It's if just a cup of water I place within your hand, and just a cup of water is all that I demand. And that's such a simple illustration of a profound truth. That God is anything that we give to others is coming from Him anyway. And so taking care of myself, which for a Christian includes, very much includes, spiritual connection with God, and letting Him, fill us up. And you gave the great example of Jesus withdrawing to the lonely places to pray and to be with His Father. So self-care includes spiritual self-care. And I think of many examples in the Bible, actually, of people who do kind of get to their wits' end, and how God always responds to them with empathy. A big story to me is the story of Elijah, and Elijah being on the run from Jezebel, basically wanting to die. He's given all that he can. He feels like there's no one else faithful in the whole land, and not everything that Elijah believed was true. About the situation. He had lost perspective, but God's gentleness in dealing with him. And you might remember the story, of course, where he's on the mountain, Mount Sinai, and there's I don't remember the exact order, but there's like the earthquake and the wind, and I think a fire, and it says that, but God wasn't in those. And God shows up in the gentle, quiet whisper, and I think it reminds me how God sees our hurt. And use another example that just kind of pop into my mind now, but I think about Hagar, and Hagar being, again, someone on the run, and had just completely dry, literally. I mean, she was dying of thirst, she and her son, and God coming to her rescue, even though she was not the mother of the covenant child like Sarah was of Isaac. God sees her, He cares for her need in that situation. That shows us the heart of God. And I think we get it upside down when we think that God needs us instead of, no, we need God, and when we get to thinking that God needs us, that can lead us into some of those unhealthy places where we think we're letting God down, kind of like you talked about, earlier in your story. And I don't think we can let God down just because we are unable to do something, because anything that we can do comes from Him anyway. But yeah, thank you for elaborating on that. I wanted to touch on another point in your story, because you brought this up. It isn't just us that is affected when, in terms of our when we get married, right? We're going to have someone that we share dreams and with, and this happened with me and my wife as well. That we had a way that we thought our life was going to look, and it looks, very different. Your husband was in ministry, was in preaching, and he ended up getting a different job. I think you said in computers, and I think, and I'm not, and you could elaborate on this if you want, but I mean, usually that has something to do in this situation with needing better insurance coverage and things of that nature. For me, Katie had to go and become a full-time teacher for a while for that very reason. And it wasn't an interruption of her dreams, because I think she did intend to go teach at some point, but it became absolutely vital to us to be able to survive financially. And if the situation were reversed, it could have been very easily me having to leave ministry to go get, a job that would provide that kind of health care. So I just want to ask you how you guys have navigated that as a couple, and how, too much as you're willing to share, kind of how he's dealt with that. If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely correct. And the reason that he kind of shifted the focus of his career was to be able to better provide for our family. As I started to have more and more health challenges, as our firstborn was born with the congenital defect, she now has the same condition
Mm,
I do. She's been formally diagnosed as
I'm
well.
sorry.
And as we've gone through that over those first few years, that was his first thought was, I have to provide for my family, and that's what the Lord has called me to do first and foremost. So he worked really hard. He went back to school. He was working nights, stocking shelves at Walmart in order to pay bills, and then during the day, he was going to school and, watching our toddler, and did that for a couple of years, to get his computer degree, and then slowly has been building that up, and his focus, if you ask him, has been, I wanna get to a point where I can financially support my family so that if my wife can't work at all anymore, we're gonna be okay, and she's gonna be covered with health insurance and so forth. So, I'm very blessed. He is an amazing person. He he constantly goes out of his way to try to find ways to make my life easier and better, and to make sure that we're taken care of at all times. Um, you asked about how we navigated a lot of that as a couple. I think just constant open
Hmm.
communication. We have had to make sure we talk about everything, every little thing, every big thing, every decision, every non-decision, just constantly keeping that door of communication open as we have navigated every challenge. Um, Making sure that we have kept the Lord kind of foremost in our marriage, and staying connected to Him as much as we have each other. And then spending time, like we have to make sure that we don't just take care of the kids and do our jobs, that we also find time to do things fun together as a couple. So that means me learning to enjoy football and going to football games with him. And that means him learning to enjoy reading books and sometimes sitting on the couch and reading books with me. But making sure that life isn't consumed by all of the needs, and that we still have that leisure time together. So I'd say those have been the 2 most important pieces for us.
And really, that's good advice for any married couple. I just think the stresses of chronic illness and pain make it even more vital that we have those open lines of communication. That way, both of you aren't thinking totally different things about the direction of things are going. And of course, that can lead to a lot of trouble. But it sounds like you have a beautiful marriage and a beautiful family. And I know that can be a blessing and a place of reprieve for us in our struggles of with the chronic conditions. And in that, I know we may have listeners who don't have that strong support network or didn't have a spouse that stood by their side. And so we acknowledge that um, extreme difficulty that you may be going through. And all we can say is that, yes, we recognize that that is a blessing that not everyone has. And, and that adds yet another level of stress on your life. And again, maybe even more of a reason to go and find help and talk to a counselor, a therapist that can help you navigate that. I actually want to correct something I said earlier because I talked about your husband leaving ministry, and really what he did was chose a ministry that he most needed to do in that situation, which was to his family. And so yes, he left professional ministry, but and that I'm sure was costly. But on the other hand, I think you said this in your story that family, God wants us to prioritize our family. And when our family's in trouble, we got to take care of our family. And that applied to you and it applied to him. And I think that applies to all of us. And again, this kind of model of ministry that we had seen in the church where people sacrifice their families in order to stay in ministry or to work long, long hours in ministry, it has led to a lot of bad things, but a lot of bad outcomes. And God wants us to take care of our. In fact, as we were told in Ephesians 5, we're to love our. In this case, he's talking about to the husbands to love their wives as Christ loves the church. He doesn't say put the church above, your spouse. And of course, in that same context, he's addressing both husbands and wives, but so what a beautiful picture of Christ's love for the church and how your husband has responded in your story, in your journey. And it is your journey together anyway. It's not just your journey and he's, you know what I mean? It's a partnership. That's what we sign up for when we get married. It's what we want to, and so we're in everything together. And so I thank you for, for sharing that. Bethany, is there anything else you would want to add to your journey or your outlook going forward, and that you would want to share with our listeners?
I think one thing I'd want to share is when you have chronic health issues, again, it's sometimes easy to feel like it's not just that it's your fault, but that there's something wrong with you, and that you're inherently wrong or bad or something like that. And I think it's important to remember that we truly are knit together in our mother's womb, that we truly are created this way for a purpose. And yes, that can seem kind of harsh when you think, well, did God want me to suffer? Well, no. But God does allow us to walk through all of this because of the other purposes that He has, because of the other people and situations in our life that we will go through, and the other people that we will touch and encourage and minister to. And I bring up that verse in particular, the knit together in your mother's womb, because with my condition, Ehlers-Danlos, the connective tissue is formed in the womb. That's when those building blocks are put together. So mine were put together a different way, making me a little bit looser. And when I got pregnant with my third child, she was not expected. She was a very unplanned but wonderful miracle. And I say miracle because, without going into detail, there were some complications of the pregnancy, very rare ones that had never even happened in the history of that medical facility I attended. Um, but because my tissues are looser, because I am stretchier, they were able to save her life. And she's here today because of how I am, because of how I was knit together in the mother's womb. And she's still little. I don't know what the Lord has for her, but I know He's got some sort of purpose, because she would not be here if it weren't for the way that He made me. And so I just like to share that story to encourage everyone that there the Lord does have His hand on your life. He is guiding you, though it feels like you lose a lot. There's so much more that you're gaining through the process, and that you will continue to gain, and probably a lot that we won't know even until we get to heaven. It's like that illustration of looking at the tapestry, and we can only see that underside of all of those strings, and it looks like a hot mess, but the Lord is the one up top who can see that beautiful picture of what He's weaving. So I just wanted to share that to encourage everyone that, He is there, He is with you, He does have a plan, even if you don't see it till heaven. You're not alone, and there's nothing wrong with you. He didn't create you and make you something that you shouldn't be. He truly does have His hand on your life.
What an incredible, powerful testimony about your daughter. And wow, I mean, I kind of brought, emotion, tears to my eyes just hearing that, because it's just something you could never anticipate, and a good that you could never see. But like you said, God sees everything from beginning to end. And what a faithful testimony to how He works in our lives. Like you said, some we know about, some we don't. And, there's just this promise that He will be with us through everything that we're going through. But we'll end on that note, because that's really the theme we're trying to emphasize in this particular interview, this podcast, is that we recognize that the losses that we experience are not just our own, our families and our own, and they're very real. And a lot of times people get kind of hung up in that part of their journey of trying to go back and reclaim. And if a person's able to get better or get healthier and able to reclaim something they lost, that too is a powerful testimony. But most of our listeners haven't been able to experience that. Most of our listeners are people who are living still daily with chronic illness, chronic pain. And it may be that God wants them to live faithfully with that. And that's hard to hear. It's hard to accept, especially if you're in an environment, and you hit on this, Bethany, where people are being told that there's something defective about their faith if they have a chronic illness or chronic pain. And that's just bad theology. I don't see how you can thrive spiritually in that environment, especially if you're living with chronic illness or chronic pain. You may have to get into a healthier situation. But there's nothing in the Bible that shies away from the prospect of faithful suffering. I mean, from beginning to end, there are people, yes, there are people that are miraculously healed. We praise God for that. But there are many, many examples where that does not happen. And that does not mean God has abandoned you. That means he's doing something in your life through you and through your illness and pain. And yeah, I know you'd rather it just not happen, not be there. That's what we all wanted. But I think there are blessings ahead if we can embrace what has happened and embrace that God is walking with us to be able to move forward. And I feel like your story beautifully illustrates that. So Bethany, thank you for being with us on In the Seams. And I want to thank our listeners as well for spending some time with us whenever this goes on air, which will, we're recording this on December 14th. So I think it will be available here in a couple days. And as you're listening to this, as the Christmas is, and dead ahead in your sights. And we pray that this will be a time of blessing and time with refreshment with your family. And we know the holidays can be difficult for their own reasons, as well. And so, but we hope that the hope that we have in the incarnate Christ can be with you and get you through this holiday season. So we'll be back on air sometime next year. I always encourage you to go to brokenandmended.org to see when our support groups are meeting, or if those aren't always up to date, that's my fault. But you can at least see what groups are available when they normally meet, and also other resources like our Facebook group and so forth that you can get plugged into, and things, including this podcast, that you can find there on our website. So we'll sign off with that and wish you a very Merry Christmas.